Hello and welcome to my full bookshelf. As you can see, today we have a bit of a darker, cozier theme going on. The reason for this is because you're watching this the week of Halloween. October is coming to a close, and all we want is a little bit of spookiness, a little bit of ghost stories, a little bit of cozy reads to snuggle up to as the weekend approaches and as the month closes. We're really lucky because this year Halloween happens on a weekend, so we can just sort of spend a weekend at home or go to a cemetery on a walk and just carry a book with us and enjoy that over a weekend. I wanted to suggest you some books that are either cozy or spooky or generally terrifying that you can read most likely over the course of a weekend. In some cases that might not be possible because of length, but in most cases you can finish a book within 2-3 days. So get a cup of tea, get a nice cozy blanket and listen to my recommendations. I have split this video in 4 parts. Each part is going to deal with a different category. The first one, cozy or atmospheric books. Books that you want to snuggle up to and that literally transport you to a different universe, to a different place, to a different country, to a different vibe or setting. The first book that I have, this is not particularly spooky, but it is a very cozy book. It's an incredibly atmospheric book, and I've never failed to recommend it to somebody who has then come back to me and said, "Oh my god, thank you for recommending that book." It was quite popular earlier in 2015, 2016 I want to say, and then it sort of disappeared a little bit. But the book I'm talking about is The Night Circus by Erin Morgenstern. This is set during Victorian times, mostly in England, mostly in London, but also in other parts of the world. And it is a story that sort of has a mystery at the center of it. We know there is a magic circus, the Night Circus, and we know that this circus is magic and special because it appears and disappears, and people don't see it appearing and don't see it disappearing, they just enjoy it. It arrives, nobody knows that it's coming, and then you see it. And it can be in a city, in a village, in a place that is in Europe or maybe not in Europe, and this circus is a whole different world. There are magicians, there are performers, there are snacks that you can smell and feel and almost taste when you're reading the book. But at the center of the book, as I said, there is this mystery. And this mystery is this magic competition, a tournament. And we know 2 contestants. We know there is a male contestant, and that's Marco, and we know there is a female contestant, and that's Celia. And the tournament starts when they're really, really young. And we know that at some point somebody's going to be a winner. We don't know how. We don't know what the rules of the contest are, the tournament are. But we are in the Night Circus, and we can only imagine that the Night Circus has something to do with this tournament. So if you want something that transports you to a different place and that has a setting that is very cozy, very atmospheric, you want to be part of the Night Circus, you want to visit the Night Circus even if it's just fictional, then this is a perfect book for you. The second book in this category is a little bit darker, so I went from soft to a little bit darker. And this book has gained a lot of popularity over the past couple of years, and I am definitely part of those people that incredibly hypes this book. I think it's beautifully written, but I think the way it is told is also incredibly smart. The book that I'm talking about is probably one of the most famous dark academia books, and that is The Secret History by Donna Tartt. Again, this is not spooky per se, this is not scary, but it is dark. And again, going back to the Night Circus, it really transports you to a very specific setting, into a very specific time. So this book talks about, it is narrated in first person by Richard, who is our narrator, and later on in the book we discover that it's not always as reliable. This book deals with a murder. It's a murder mystery in a way, but it starts in a different way. We know who's been killed, we know who's killed him, and we probably know when and why that happened. But the rest of the book is told from Richard's perspective, and Richard is a student who attends this elite college in Vermont. So the story takes place in Vermont, and you can generally feel this atmosphere of this beautiful college with these beautiful rooms and, you know, mahogany tables and antique bookshelves and the library and the leaves on the floor and the tiny village feel that this academic setting has, even though, you know, it's in a town, is absolutely wonderful. But Richard talks to us about his experience while at college studying classics, and he talks about the experience of meeting this other group of friends, well, not really friends, people that study together with him in this incredibly, even more elite little class that studies ancient Greek and Latin, with this professor that is a little bit weird and has strange ideas that encourages people to feel and become the subjects that they're reading. So I'm not going to say anything else. Probably you've heard about The Secret History. Probably you know that this is one of the most important pieces of literature when it comes to dark academia. And if you haven't had the chance to read it just yet, I would definitely say pick it up. You're not going to regret it. It's a wonderful book. It's so beautifully written. And while it is not necessarily a spooky tale, it is a tale that is definitely unsettling. The next category is quite special to me. These are books that I've loved for a long time, and the reason why I've loved these books for a long time is probably also because they've been around for a really long time. The next category is the classics. Amongst the classics, I obviously had to pick Mary Shelley's Frankenstein. This edition that you see is actually the original text from 1818. This is the anniversary edition that came out in 2018. The text that we normally read when we read Frankenstein, I believe, is from 1832. I might be wrong, but it's a later version. But either way, we know the story. There is a scientist, Victor Frankenstein. He's particularly interested with physiology, with the human body, with nature, with creating and taking away life. During one of his experiments, he manages to put together a concoction of body parts and creates the creature, the monster. While at the same time he is obviously proud of having succeeded in his experiment, quite early on he realizes that he has created something unhuman, something ungodly, something that should not exist. He's terrified and he's ashamed, and he leaves this creature completely, and this creature sort of enters its own journey to find Frankenstein and ask for explanation, ask for help. As the book progresses, we see more of Frankenstein and we understand more of Frankenstein, but we also understand more the creature that feels rejected, the creature that feels alone, and the creature that then feels like it needs to seek revenge in a certain way. Frankenstein is an epistolary novel, so we read and learn about the story through letters, and through letters we understand more about the characters, but we're also transported into different parts of the world. Most of the novel takes place, I would say, probably in Central Europe, but then there are also other parts that take place in different parts of Europe and in the North Pole. It's incredibly atmospheric, it's incredibly gothic in the true sense of the word. You feel like you're in this, you know, misty moors. You feel like you're stuck in ice with your boat. You feel like you're on this quest for your own life and to save lives. So Frankenstein is definitely a book. It's quite short as well, and it's definitely a book that I would recommend. It is not scary per se, but it really makes you wonder, you know, what was going through Mary Shelley's head when she wrote it, because she wrote it and she was really young, and it's admirable how a young woman at that time was able to put together a text that is so revolutionary to begin with, but also quite explicit when it comes to themes such as the human body and such as the relationship between human and nature. So a book that is absolutely wonderful, very atmospheric, a little bit gory, a little bit scary, but not particularly scary. The second book that is in this category is another book that I'm sure a lot of people have heard about. Probably not that many have read more than a few pages. It's another epistolary novel, and it was written also in the 1800s, and that is Dracula by Bram Stoker. This is the original vampire novel, the original, you know, gory sort of novel that everybody says, oh my god, yes, I love vampires and all that. Obviously, we know the key plot. The key plot is Jonathan is a solicitor from England. He goes on a business trip to Transylvania, to the castle owned by Count Dracula. During his visit, he realizes Count Dracula is a vampire. He manages to escape, return to England, and then Count Dracula also moves to England, and while he's in England, he is then chased and hunted by a group of people led by Van Helsing. That is a story, we all know it. What happens is I'm not going to spoil the end in case you haven't read it and you don't know how it ends, but it's quite predictable. But the reasons why this story is so special and the reason why this book is so nice is because, again, it's told in epistolary form, and through the notes that we read, we discover the story bit by bit, but we also feel the same fears that the narrator has, and we can feel fear for our lives when we are Jonathan. We are transported to Transylvania. We see Transylvania in a way. One of the other reasons why I incredibly enjoy this novel is because it ranges through various themes. It's not just a novel that deals with a vampire and hunting the vampire, but it also deals with sexuality, it deals with race, it deals with the concept of otherness. So something that is not quite human, something that is not quite normal, and that's wonderful. I think it's wonderfully done. And if you're looking for a novel that is classic, but you feel like a classic might be a little bit too hard, this is a very, I don't want to say easy read, but it's a pleasant read. And the fact that it's told as if it was a letter, you can really read it imagining the narrator in your head and imagining somebody is reading out loud the letters to you. The next category is particularly dear to me. When I was a teenager, I almost by chance discovered Anne Rice's books, and I fell in love with them. I fell in love with the writing, I fell in love with the stories, and with the characters. Now, one of the most famous arcs that Anne Rice has written is The Vampire Chronicles. Everything starts with Interview with the Vampire by Anne Rice. I believe this was written in the early 70s. I might be completely wrong, but I think it's the early 70s. Interview with the Vampire, as the title suggests, is an interview that takes place with a vampire. So we have the central character, who is Louis, who is this vampire who tells a story to a reporter during an interview. He decides to sit down with a reporter and tell him everything that happened. Tell him the last few months of his life as a human in New Orleans in the 1700s. I think 1700s. I believe it's 1700s. But also how he became a vampire, the being that turned him into a vampire, and that's when we are introduced to Lestat, and his first few years as a vampire, his journey as a vampire in the world over the centuries, and now why he's telling his story right now to this very man. It doesn't sound scary per se, but it is. There are some scenes that are incredibly graphic. It's a bloody novel. It's a novel that makes you question whether vampires actually exist. Anne Rice does an excellent job creating atmospheres, but also creating the rituals around the being of the vampire. She creates rules for the world of vampires. She creates traditions. She creates a whole new set of rules that have to do with this creatures, and it's wonderful, and it's so meticulous, and it's a great job that she does. She generally creates a whole new world order for vampires, who, by the way, coexist with humans as we know them in this reality that she's talking about. There is a lot of sex, not necessarily just in this novel, but in the rest of the novels in the series, there is a lot of sex, and it's beautifully written. If you are looking for an erotic novel, this could also do the trick, trust me. But yeah, it's a wonderful story, and it's a wonderful beginning to the rest of the series. Obviously, if you've already read this one, pick another one in the Vampire Chronicles, that will do the trick. They are all beautiful. I haven't read the two that came out in the mid-2000s, so I can't express my judgment about those. I have them, they're sitting there. At some point I've read them, but the reviews are not particularly good. But this one is wonderful, and I highly recommend you read it. And the next book you guessed it, it's also written by Anne Rice, and it's also part of a longer series of books. The book I'm talking about is The Witching Hour by Anne Rice, and this is the first novel in the Mayfair Witches series. Now, I read this book in the early 2000s. I was a child/adolescent. I remember very little about this book, and as you can see, this is one of the books that I said you will not be able to finish in a weekend. I mean, you could if you spend literally all your time reading it, but it's a chunky boy. I think it's over, is 1,206, and 7 pages, and this is the, mass market paperback, basically, edition. But anyway, I remember very little of this, but I do remember it was unputdownable. I remember the story was chilling, the story was well crafted, and to give you a rough idea, we follow the life of Rowan, who is a witch within a family of witches, the Mayfair Witches, and beautiful, successful neurosurgeon with an extraordinary power to heal or to harm. While sailing off the California coast, she rescues a drowning man, Michael Curry. And then we discover that Michael also sort of acquires, or already has, I can't remember, some specific powers. But as the book progresses and as the later on series progresses, we realize that this family has been guided, let's put it that way, by the spirit, Lasher. And we, later on in the series, find out more about Lasher and how the spirit is connected to the family. Again, I haven't said much about this, but if you like a good witch story, if you like a good chilling story, quite ambiguous, quite sexual, quite mysterious, then this is a book for you. It's an excellent read. Again, Anne Rice has a way with words that allow her to craft realities that we would not think possible. And it's a wonderful read. Again, I apologize, I can't remember too much about it, and I'm thinking about rereading it because I remember loving it with all my heart. But I would definitely recommend this and the rest of the books in the Mayfair Witches series. And we have finally made it to the final category. And this, my friends, is the chill to the bone category. Be ready to be spooked. The first book that I want to talk about is The Haunting of Hill House by Shirley Jackson. Now, this book can be defined, and I believe Shirley Jackson herself defined it, as a ghost story. This story is centered around Hill House, as the title suggests. We have 4 main characters. We have Dr. Montague, who is a scientist who is trying to determine whether hauntings can actually happen. Luke, Eleanor, and Theodora. Each character has something a little bit weird about themselves, something a little bit quirky about themselves. And they decide to spend the summer in Hill House, which Dr. Montague rents for the entire duration of the experiment. During the experiment, we find out more about each character. Slowly, we find out details here and there. And as things start to happen within the house, we realize that something supernatural might actually be going on. Whether it's the house that is possessed, whether it's one of the characters that is possessed, whether one of the characters is being possessed by the house, that is what's happening. And it's chilling and it's terrifying. I think it's important here to make a distinction between horror and terror. And I think this book falls into the terror category. Because we don't see what happens. We sort of gather it from the reactions that we have to certain events. And we see the events through these lenses of an experiment in a way. But at the same time, we are also skeptical, or at least I read it as a skeptic, and I'm like, how can this be possible? But then you see something happening, you're like, surely there is something supernatural to explain that. And it's a wonderful, wonderful book. It genuinely terrifies you. It is very gothic in style. It is something that reminds you of the style, say, of Bram Stoker or of Mary Shelley, for instance. It is very classical, but at the same time it's modern. And it's very, very scary in its own way. It's scary in the sense that you can feel this constant sense of unease, but you can't quite understand where it's coming from because nothing particularly terrifying is happening in the novel, but yet you feel really, really unsettled within. And I think Shirley Jackson does an incredible job sort of making us perceive the house. And one final point, if you have watched the Netflix series, which in my opinion is phenomenal, don't be worried, that hasn't spoiled anything for you. This is a complete different story. There are elements that are similar, but the characters are completely different, the story is completely different, and the ending is different. Shirley Jackson's book also serves as a perfect segue into the next book that I want to talk about and that I've mentioned on this channel a couple of times before this year. And this book is The Dangers of Smoking in Bed by Mariana Enriquez, translated from the Spanish by Megan McDowell. This is a collection of short stories, and all the short stories have a gothic horror feel or undertone to them. Now, with short stories, often I find that it's a bit of a hit and miss when it comes to horror short stories. With this ones, I can tell you, you will be genuinely terrified sometimes. Some of the stories are incredibly gory, and some of the stories start as normal stories and you wonder, what is this thing? Why is this supposed to scare me? Until you reach pretty much the last paragraph and you're like, oh my god, what did I just read? And then you rush back to the beginning of the story and you reread it and you find all the hidden clues about what was about to happen and why it was so terrifying. This book is also incredibly intelligent. All the stories bar one, I think, take place in Argentina, and you can see that the author herself, she's Argentinian, and she probably, although this is just speculation on my side, wanted to make a point about the Argentinian politics and the Argentinian situation during the dictatorship. And I do have to say, each story is incredibly intelligent because if you read it with the other key, the key of somebody who knows a little bit about Argentinian past and Argentinian history and Argentinian politics, you will see that there is a strong critique to what happened during those years. And you can see that in themes that are quite frequent such as children put at the center of many stories, history, as in this concept that is stolen, and the concept of the city as the prisoner. Obviously, with a collection of short stories, there is very little you can say without spoiling them, so I'm not going to say anything. My personal favorite is probably the one that takes place in Barcelona. I found that quite chilling and unsettling. Every single story is scary and terrifying in its own way. Some are gorier than others, some are more explicit than others, and some you think are absolutely normal stories until there is a massive plot twist. I think this also makes the perfect read on Halloween night or, Halloween weekend, because being short stories, you can literally just read one in between tasks, read one while you're making some food, and you will be thoroughly chilled, trust me. We've come nearly to the end of this video. There is the final book, and to me, if you ask me what is the scariest book you've ever read, I am probably going to say We Have Always Lived in a Castle by Shirley Jackson. Now, some people may say, oh, but that wasn't that scary. The story is told in first person and is told from the perspective of Mary Catherine, or for friends, we're friends, Maricat. Maricat is 17 or 18 at the time the narration takes place. And Maricat lives in this large mansion that has belonged to her family for generations and generations and generations in Vermont, with her sister Constance, who is older than her. I believe she's 10 years older, so in her late 20s by the time the narration takes place, and her old uncle. Now, Constance and Maricat and the uncle are not part of the community of the village they live in, the town they live in. This is because years prior, a big crime was committed. The entire family, with the exception of the 3 living members of the family, was poisoned during dinner. And they were poisoned by some poison that was put into the sugar. And the main suspect is Constance herself, because she didn't eat sugar that night. Maricat, on the other hand, had misbehaved before dinner and she was sent to her room. So she was not even present when the crime took place. The entire town, as I said, is terrified of them and tries to somehow bully Maricat, who is the only person that shows up in town to do weekly tasks such as grocery shopping and collecting mail and so on. Maricat, Constance and the uncle seem to live a fairly happy life in their own strange circumstances. They are very isolated, but they seem to be happy. Maricat has this sort of witchy, almost personality. She does little spells, she does little rituals to keep the property safe. As the story evolves, we're introduced to a new character, and that's cousin Charles. And Charles means business. He arrives and he has plans. And plans unsettle the balance of the people living in the castle. And there we start learning more about what happened to the family, about what happened at the dinner party, and about what is going to happen later on. This book is incredibly intelligent in the way it's told because we have a narrator, but fairly early on we realize it's a fairly unreliable narrator, but at the same time there is a mystery that hasn't really been solved, and let me tell you, sometimes clues are hiding right in front of your eyes, and that is what is frightening at the very end. Everything was laid there in front of your eyes and you had no idea. And for me, that makes a great, chilling book. Again, very short. You can read this on Halloween night. Well, if you made it this far into the video, thank you so much for watching. I hope you have found a recommendation suitable for what you want to read on Halloween night, or Halloween weekend I should say. I personally think I will snuggle up with a cozy book this year. I have one, I'm looking at it right now. It's nice and cozy and we'll probably talk about it in a video later on. But for now, these are my recommendations and I hope you managed to find one book that you want to read on Halloween weekend. Again, thank you so much for watching. Please do let me know if you've read any of these books and if you agree with my description of the books and whether you will be picking it up again or you'll be picking up one of my recommendations this Halloween. Enjoy talking to the spirits, enjoy getting cozy under a blanket, enjoy carving a pumpkin or drinking that pumpkin spice latte. Enjoy whatever makes you happy. It's a nice spooky end of the month and I hope you have a lovely time. Pick up a book, don't forget to read, and leave a thumbs up or thumbs down if you didn't like it to this video. It really helps. And I will see you next time. Goodbye.